Under the moonlit edges of ancient Rome, people gathered where officials could not see them. They sang, drank wine, whispered vows, and followed gods the empire could not fully control. To Rome, these were not just rituals, they were hidden loyalties, secret communities, and possible threats to the order of the world, from Bacchic nights to druid groves and forbidden Christian gatherings. This is the story of the ancient rites that terrified an empire. Before we go deeper, take a moment to like the video and subscribe if you enjoy mysterious history, lost beliefs, and the dark side of ancient civilizations. The torches are almost out when the singing changes. Somewhere beyond the last houses, past the ordered streets and sleeping courtyards, a small crowd gathers under the cover of darkness. Wine passes from hand to hand. Drums pulse low at first, then faster. A flute cuts through the night air with a thin, restless sound. Faces appear and vanish in firelight. Some are young, some old, some freeborn, some enslaved, some respectable enough by daylight to pass through the market without notice. Here, under the moon, the usual map of Roman society begins to blur. Men and women stand together. The poor breathe beside the well-connected. Private vows are made where public officials cannot hear them. Bodies move in rhythm, not in the measured order of a civic procession, but in something looser, hotter, and harder to command. To the people inside the ritual, this may feel like release. It may feel like contact with a god who does not arrive through marble temples, senatorial decrees, or the calm voice of a priest examining the organs of a sacrificed animal. It may feel ancient, intimate, and dangerous in the way powerful religious experience can feel dangerous, even to those who seek it willingly. But to Roman authorities, watching from the outside, the same scene becomes something else. It becomes a meeting without permission, a loyalty not supervised by the state, a night world where oaths may be sworn, secrets kept, and fear transformed into belonging. Before we go deeper, take a moment to like the video and subscribe if this is the kind of history and mystery you enjoy. Rome does not fear every ritual. In fact, Rome is built from ritual. Its year is stitched together by festivals, sacrifices, vows, purifications, omens, and public ceremonies so regular that sacred time becomes part of political time. A consul can lead an army only after the proper signs. A general can claim triumph only through a procession that turns victory into divine approval. A household begins the day with small gestures toward the spirits of the family. A city survives because, at least in theory, it maintains peace with the gods. What frightens Rome is not religion itself. What frightens Rome is religion it cannot read, cannot count, cannot place under a magistrate's eye. In the Roman imagination, the boundary between devotion and conspiracy can be thin. A secret ceremony is never simply private. It can become a hidden court, a hidden army, a hidden law. Roman power depends on visibility. Citizens are counted, families are ranked, priests are named, soldiers swear public oaths. Even the gods have official addresses. They live in temples, receive offerings on recognized days, and appear in processions whose routes can be watched from balconies and streets. But a ritual performed at night by people of mixed status carries a different power. It suggests that the city has another city beneath it, an unseen republic of initiates. The evidence remains incomplete, and much of what survives comes from voices hostile to the people they describe. Rome leaves behind laws, speeches, histories, inscriptions, and monuments. But the terrified communities at the center of these accusations rarely leave their own explanations in equal measure. The official record speaks loudly. The ritual participants speak in fragments, or not at all. So the historian stands in a difficult place, listening to the accusations of power while trying to imagine the quieter reality underneath. Some gatherings may have been ecstatic but harmless. Some may have broken rules of gender, status, and family authority without threatening the state. No single explanation fully accounts for this, because Roman fear is never only about what happens in a grove or a rented room. It is about what those acts seem to reveal. To understand why a ritual can terrify an empire, it helps to picture Rome not as a single stone machine, but as a living body constantly defending its edges. Its roads carry merchants, soldiers, tax collectors, captives, rumours, sacred statues, and foreign gods. Every conquest brings wealth, but also contamination in the eyes of the anxious. New music enters the city. New foods, fabrics, medicines, charms, and funerary customs appear. Slaves from far provinces whisper prayers in languages their masters do not understand. Soldiers return from campaigns with amulets, stories, scars, and sometimes loyalties formed under strange skies. Rome can absorb almost anything, and this is one of its great strengths. Yet absorption is not the same as comfort. The city likes to imagine that it rules the sacred as it rules land. It can invite a foreign goddess into Rome with solemn ceremony and give her a temple. It can consult oracles, translate divine names, and fold conquered deities into its own expanding order. But the gods do not always arrive politely. Sometimes they come through migrant neighbourhoods, roadside shrines, sailors' songs, ecstatic healers, grieving women, or soldiers who have seen too much death and want a god who understands the dark. Sometimes they enter not from the top of society, but from below, through the people least trusted to define public morality. That is when ritual becomes disturbing. The gods are no longer simply being honoured by Rome. They are being discovered by people Rome struggles to control. There is also the problem of night. Ancient cities are different after sunset. The familiar streets narrow into shadow. Oil lamps tremble in doorways. Watchmen and magistrates cannot see everything. In the dark, rumour grows teeth. A ceremony held by day in a public square can look like tradition. A ceremony held at night behind closed doors can become, in the official mind, a school for crime. Scholars still debate how much of this fear reflects actual misconduct and how much reflects elite panic. What survives in the record suggests that Roman authorities often worried less about a ritual's theology than about its social shape: who gathered, who led, who obeyed, what promises were made, and whether the normal chain of command had been replaced by another. At the heart of the terror is one simple possibility: people gathered in secret might become more loyal to one another than to Rome. A ritual creates memory. It binds strangers through shared danger, shared words, shared food, shared silence, shared trembling. It gives shape to emotions the state cannot easily use: grief, ecstasy, guilt, hope, terror, longing. Rome can command armies and build roads across mountains, but it cannot fully govern what happens inside the human imagination when music rises in the dark and a god seems close enough to touch. So the torches burn low, and the empire listens from beyond the trees. It hears song and thinks of conspiracy. It sees dancing and imagines rebellion. It hears the names of unfamiliar gods and wonders whether its own gods are being replaced. Perhaps, in some cases, there really are crimes hidden in the shadows. Perhaps, in others, there is only worship made strange by distance and fear. The uncertainty is part of what gives the story its power. For Rome, the most frightening ritual is not the one it can clearly condemn. It is the one it cannot fully understand. Rome's fear of hidden ritual begins with a confidence that is almost impossible to separate from its politics. The Roman state does not think of religion as a private matter tucked inside a person's heart. It thinks of religion as a public relationship, a long and careful agreement between the human community and the powers that surround it. The gods are not distant abstractions. They are neighbours of a terrifying kind. They protect, punish, warn, demand, and remember. A city that honours them properly may prosper. A city that neglects them may suffer plague, famine, military defeat, lightning strikes, monstrous births, failed harvests, or disasters that appear random only to those who do not know how to read the sacred world. This is why Roman religion is so deeply practical. It is not built primarily around belief in the modern sense, as if the empire cares most about what each person privately feels. It is built around performance, precision, and obligation. The right words must be spoken. The right animal must be offered. The right day must be chosen. The right priest must stand in the right place, wearing the right garment, with the right formula carried carefully through the air. A mistake matters. A cough, a stumble, a wrong phrase, a bad omen, an unexpected sound can force a ceremony to begin again. To modern eyes this may look like nervous superstition, but to Rome it is administration of the invisible. The world is unstable, and ritual is one of the tools by which instability is held back. The city's calendar becomes a map of sacred duty. Days are marked as suitable or unsuitable for public business. Festivals return with the rhythm of seasons, harvests, military campaigns, and ancestral memory. Some days belong to the dead, some to purification, some to gods who guard boundaries, doors, fields, fires, marriages, childbirth, war, and victory. The year does not simply pass, it is managed. Time itself is placed under ritual supervision. This matters because Rome's political life depends on timing. Elections, assemblies, legal decisions, declarations of war, and military commands all exist within a framework where the gods must not be ignored. A badly timed action is not merely inconvenient, it risks appearing impious. Priests, then, are not marginal figures. They are woven into public authority. Rome has pontiffs, augurs, flamens, vestal virgins, keepers of sacred books, and officials responsible for sacrifices and ceremonies that protect the state. Many of these roles are held by members of the elite, men who also move through courts, armies, and political offices. Religion is not outside government. It is one of the languages government speaks. When an augur watches birds, he's not performing a quaint side ritual. He's helping determine whether public action has divine permission. When priests consult sacred procedures, they are not decorating politics with piety. They are making politics legitimate. The Vestal Virgins offer one of the clearest images of this sacred control. Their task is simple to describe, and enormous in meaning. They tend the eternal fire of Vesta, the hearth of Rome. The flame is not just a flame. It is a living symbol of the city's continuity, a small controlled brightness at the centre of a dangerous world. If it goes out, anxiety follows. If a Vestal breaks her vow of chastity, the offence is treated not only as personal failure but as a wound in the sacred body of Rome. The punishments associated with such violations are severe, and the evidence for individual cases is shaped by political tension and moral storytelling. Yet the larger message is clear. The state imagines its survival through disciplined bodies, disciplined ceremonies, and disciplined boundaries. Sacrifice stands at the centre of this system. The animal is chosen, adorned, led forward, and offered under the eyes of witnesses. Blood touches the earth, smoke rises, the organs are examined for signs. The act is violent, but controlled violence is precisely the point. Rome does not pretend that life is gentle. It channels danger into form. It makes killing legible, public, and sacred. The sacrifice tells the community that order is being renewed. The gods have been approached through accepted paths. The people have done what must be done. The evidence remains incomplete for the full emotional texture of these ceremonies, because official descriptions often preserve procedure more than feeling. But what survives suggests a world in which correct public ritual helps people believe that catastrophe has been delayed. Omens intensify this relationship between state and cosmos. A flash of lightning, a swarm of bees, a statue sweating, a strange birth among livestock, a bird behaving oddly, a sound heard at the wrong moment. these signs can be treated as messages requiring response. Some reports may seem bizarre, and scholars still debate how literally every recorded prodigy should be read. Yet the pattern matters more than any single incident. Rome lives inside a universe that speaks. When something unnatural appears, the state must answer. It may order sacrifices, games, prayers, processions, or consultation of sacred texts. Fear becomes procedure. Panic is given a ritual script. This is one reason foreign or secret rites can become so alarming. They seem to create channels to divine power outside the state's own system of interpretation. Rome already has a way to deal with dread. It has priests for that. It has calendars, sacrifices, vows, expiations, and archives of sacred precedent. A private gathering that claims access to a god through ecstasy, initiation, or hidden knowledge bypasses this public machinery, even if no crime occurs. The structure itself is unsettling. It suggests that divine favour might be negotiated elsewhere, by people not authorised to negotiate it. The Roman household reflects the same pattern on a smaller scale. Families honour household gods, ancestral spirits, and protective powers of the home. A father's authority has religious dimensions as well as legal ones. Domestic ritual gives the family continuity, just as public ritual gives the city continuity. But here too the hierarchy is clear. Worship is not supposed to dissolve order, it reinforces it. The dead are remembered in ways that bind descendants to lineage. The hearth is protected, birth, marriage, and death are framed by custom. The household teaches Romans that sacred life is not separate from social rank. It helps preserve it. And yet Rome is never as tidy as its ideals. Beneath the official ceremonies are countless local customs, charms, healing rites, roadside offerings, women's rituals, soldiers' vows, farmers' prayers, and half-remembered practices that never fit perfectly into elite descriptions. No single explanation fully accounts for Roman religion, because it is both a state system and a lived world. A senator watching birds before a vote and a mother leaving a small offering for a sick child both belong to the sacred landscape, though not with equal public power. The empire's genius lies in its ability to tolerate much of this variety, so long as variety does not appear to threaten obedience. That condition is crucial. Rome can be flexible. It can adopt gods from defeated enemies. It can restore temples after disaster. It can permit communities to honour ancestral traditions. But flexibility has limits, and those limits appear when ritual becomes socially unpredictable. The state does not need every person to worship in exactly the same way. It does need the sacred world to remain compatible with Roman authority. Divine favour must not become a rival source of command. A ceremony may be strange and still acceptable if it can be named, placed, supervised, and made useful. A ceremony becomes frightening when it seems to form a community answerable to something Rome cannot see. So before the empire trembles at night gatherings, before senators speak of corruption and conspiracy, before foreign priests are accused of dark power in distant groves, the deeper structure is already in place. Rome believes that civilization rests on a bargain with the gods, and that bargain must be guarded by public discipline. Ritual is the wall between order and disaster. It steadies armies, families, harvests, courts, and kingship's republican descendants. But the same belief that gives Rome confidence also makes it vulnerable to religious fear. If proper ritual protects the world, improper ritual may endanger it. If public sacrifice holds the city together, secret worship may be pulling it apart. And in that narrow space between devotion and danger, some of the most terrifying stories in Roman memory begin to grow. The gods that disturb Rome do not always arrive as enemies. Some arrive in wagons, wrapped in cloth, carried with official permission through cheering streets. Some arrive on ships with merchants, sailors, captives, healers, soldiers, and slaves. Some enter almost invisibly, as a whispered name at a household shrine, a charm tied around a wrist, a song remembered from a province the empire has swallowed but not silenced. Rome conquers land, but conquest also opens doors. Every road built for legions becomes a road for stories. Every harbour that takes Roman grain also takes foreign prayers. Every slave market, military camp, and trading quarter becomes a place where sacred habits cross borders faster than officials can record them. This is one of the quiet contradictions of Roman power. The empire wants to rule the world, yet ruling the world means letting the world seep into Rome, a city that begins with local gods of hearth, field, boundary, oath, and war slowly becomes a sacred crossroads. Greek gods are identified with Roman ones until the line between adoption and translation grows blurred. Eastern goddesses enter with elaborate music and unfamiliar priests. Egyptian deities appear in neighbourhoods where the smell of incense mingles with the noise of commerce. Syrian, Phrygian, Jewish, Celtic, Iberian, North African, and Persian traditions move through the empire's arteries. Some remain attached to migrant communities. Some attract Romans who are searching for something official religion does not easily give. Roman authorities are not automatically hostile to this. They can be remarkably practical. If a god seems powerful, it may be wiser to honour that god than to insult it. Rome's religious imagination is not narrow in the sense of believing only one divine reality can exist. The Roman world is crowded with powers, and a cautious person does not mock powers merely because they are foreign. During crisis, the state may even import a deity deliberately. One of the most striking examples is the arrival of the Great Mother, Cybele, from Asia Minor during the Second Punic War. Rome, pressed by fear as Hannibal threatens Italy, consults sacred authority and receives a foreign goddess as a protector. Her sacred stone is brought to the city, and Rome gives her a place within public religion. Yet even official welcome does not mean comfort. Cybele's cult carries features that unsettle Roman expectations. Her ecstatic music, her association with mountains and wild divine power, and especially her priests, the Galli, who are known for ritual self-castration, stand far outside ordinary Roman ideals of masculine discipline. Romans may honour the goddess while keeping parts of her worship at a distance. This is a pattern repeated again and again. A foreign deity can be useful, even revered, yet the emotional style of that deity's cult may remain suspicious. Rome can place the goddess in a temple, but it cannot fully domesticate the force that made people tremble before her in the first place. What survives in the record suggests that foreign worship often becomes troubling when it offers intense personal experience. Official Roman ritual tends to emphasize correct action on behalf of family or state. Many imported or mystery traditions offer something more inward and transformative purification, healing, ecstatic contact, secret knowledge, rebirth, protection in the afterlife, or a special bond with the divine. This does not mean Roman public religion is emotionally empty. A claim that would be too simple. Public festivals can be joyful, frightening, solemn, and deeply moving. But mystery cults and ecstatic rites offer another kind of religious identity, one chosen through initiation rather than inherited through citizenship or household duty. That choice matters. A Roman is born into obligations to family, patron, ancestors, city, and later emperor. But an initiate enters a second circle, one defined by experience. The person has seen something, heard something, endured something, or sworn something not available to outsiders. The evidence remains incomplete because secrecy is part of the structure, and initiates rarely explain their rites in plain detail for later historians. Still, inscriptions, temples, images, and hostile accounts suggest that many people found in these cults a kind of belonging that official structures did not always provide. Women, freed people, slaves, soldiers stationed far from home, merchants living between cultures, and urban poor could all be drawn toward communities where status might be rearranged, softened, or give a new sacred meaning. This is not to imagine these cults as simple havens of equality. Ancient societies carry hierarchy into nearly every space they enter. Wealth still matters, gender still matters, legal status still matters, priests, patrons, and organizers still hold power. Scholars still debate how far mystery cults genuinely crossed social boundaries and how much they reproduced the world around them in sacred costume. Yet the possibility of mixed gatherings is enough to make conservative observers uneasy. If a noblewoman kneels beside a freedman, if an enslaved person shares ritual knowledge with a citizen, if a foreign priest commands attention from people who would never obey him in the forum, then the ritual has created a temporary world with unfamiliar rules. The empire also changes the scale of religious imagination. In an older village world, a god may belong to a hill, a spring, a grove, a city, or a family line. Under Rome, people move. Soldiers spend years far from home. Merchants cross seas. Captives are torn from one landscape and placed in another. A person uprooted from Syria, Egypt, Gaul, or Thrace may carry only memory, language, and ritual. A portable god becomes essential, a goddess who protects sailors, a god who guides the soul after death, a divine figure who recognizes the stranger in a strange city. These become powerful companions in an empire of displacement. Rome's own success therefore multiplies the sacred alternatives that surround it. The more roads it builds, the more rituals travel. The more provinces it conquers, the more divine names it must hear. The more people it gathers into cities, the more those cities become reservoirs of longing. Official religion can offer public stability, but it cannot answer every private wound. It cannot be everywhere a lonely soldier dreams, everywhere a mother fears childbirth. Everywhere a freed woman wants dignity, everywhere a sailor prays before a winter crossing. Into those spaces come other rites, some gentle, some ecstatic, some disciplined, some secretive, some barely understood by the officials who later condemn them. There is a lesser-known texture here that often disappears behind grand narratives of emperors and temples. Roman streets are full of tiny sacred acts, terracotta figurines, painted household shrines, curse tablets folded and buried, amulets against fever, offerings left near crossroads, small altars raised by soldiers to gods from home. Religion is not only what the Senate approves, it is what people do when uncertainty presses close. A person who has no vote, no land, and no protection from power may still have a ritual. That ritual may be the only place where fear can be spoken, even without words. For a long time, Rome can live with this crowded sacred world. It can absorb, rename, regulate, and ignore. But unease grows whenever a foreign rite seems to gather too much emotional force too far from public supervision. The problem is not merely that the god is strange. Rome has known strange gods before. The problem is that people may love the strange god in ways Rome cannot measure. They may meet after dark. They may promise silence. They may return from the ceremony changed. And when enough of these details gather in the mind of authority, curiosity hardens into suspicion, and suspicion waits only for a spark. The spark comes in the year 186 BCE, when Rome is already a city swollen by victory and anxiety. The great war against Hannibal is over, but its memory has not faded. Italy still carries scars where armies marched, farms burned, families vanished, and old certainties failed. Rome has survived the nightmare of Carthage, yet survival has changed it. Wealth from conquest flows into the city. Foreign captives, foreign luxuries, foreign stories. And foreign gods move through streets that once seemed more tightly bounded. The Republic is stronger than ever, but strength does not bring peace of mind. It brings the fear that success itself is loosening the old discipline. Into this unsettled world comes the panic over the Bacchic rites. Bacchus, known also through his Greek form Dionysus, is not an obscure god. He is associated with wine, fertility, theatre, ecstasy, release, and the unsettling power by which ordinary identity can dissolve. In Greek cities, Dionysian worship has many forms, from public festivals to mystery traditions that promise deeper contact with the god. Rome is not ignorant of him, and wine itself is hardly foreign to Roman life. The danger, in Roman eyes, does not lie simply in the name Bacchus. It lies in the shape his rites are said to have taken: private, nocturnal, emotionally intense, and spreading through networks that officials do not control. What survives in the record suggests that the authorities believe they have uncovered something much larger than a religious group. They imagine an underground society growing in the darkness of Italy, bound by initiation, secrecy, and crime. According to the hostile tradition preserved by Livy, the rites have changed from occasional ceremonies into frequent night gatherings. Women, men, young people, and people of lower status are said to mingle under the influence of wine, music, and frenzy. Accusations multiply with almost theatrical speed: sexual corruption, forged wills, poisonings, murders, false testimony, and conspiratorial oaths. The list is so extreme that scholars still debate how much reflects real misconduct and how much reflects panic, moral fear, and political storytelling. The Roman Senate reacts as if the Republic itself is in danger. This is important. A private cult is not treated as a local scandal to be settled quietly. It becomes a matter of state security. Investigations spread across Rome and Italy. Informers are heard. Suspects are arrested. Executions and imprisonments follow. Officials search for priests, leaders, initiates, and anyone connected to the forbidden gatherings. The state does not merely punish certain crimes. It attempts to break the ritual structure that made such secret association possible. The Bacchanalia are not completely erased, but they are placed under strict control. No group may meet freely. No priest may preside without permission. No large gathering may form without official approval. The surviving senatorial decree Regia, preserved on a bronze tablet found in southern Italy, gives the panic a hard administrative edge. It shows that the crackdown is not just literary invention. Rome really does issue restrictions on Bacchic worship, and those restrictions are detailed enough to reveal the nature of official fear. The decree does not deny the god entirely. It does not say Bacchus must never be honoured under any circumstances. Instead, it controls numbers, leadership, funds, oaths, and meetings. That detail is revealing. The authorities are not only afraid of ecstasy, they are afraid of organisation. They are afraid of a religious association becoming a social body with its own internal loyalty. The evidence remains incomplete, because the voices of ordinary Bacchic worshippers are mostly lost. A young initiate who came seeking purification does not leave a memoir. A woman drawn to the god's night songs does not explain herself in an inscription. A slave who found in the ritual a brief escape from the humiliations of daylight does not testify to us directly. We hear mostly from those who feared them. This imbalance matters. Roman writers often present the affair as a rescue of the state from moral infection, yet the very intensity of the accusations should make us cautious. In times of panic, societies often describe hidden groups as if every private act conceals a public threat. Still, it would be too simple to say nothing troubling ever happened. Secret religious groups can create opportunities for exploitation, coercion, and abuse, especially when initiation, fear, intoxication, and hierarchy combine. Ancient critics may exaggerate, but exaggeration often grows around some kernel of social tension. No single explanation fully accounts for the Bacchanalian affair. It may have involved genuine crimes by some participants, anxiety over women and youth outside family supervision, fear of lower status networks, suspicion toward Greek-style ecstasy, and the Senate's desire to assert authority over Italy after decades of war. The panic is powerful because all of these forces can exist at once. To the Roman elite, The most disturbing image is not simply wine-soaked disorder, it is the reversal of command. A respectable household depends on fathers, husbands, patrons, and magistrates. The Bacchic gathering, as imagined by its enemies, creates another hierarchy. Initiators command secrecy, priests and priestesses guide behavior. The god himself authorizes experiences that ordinary law cannot easily inspect. A young man might obey the ritual leader rather than his father. A woman might leave the controlled space of the household and enter a night community. An enslaved person might know sacred secrets hidden from a master. Even if these possibilities are exaggerated, they strike directly at Roman nerves. The geography of the panic also matters. This is not presented as a single temple scandal in Rome. It spreads through Italy, through towns and communities tied to Rome, but not identical with it. The Republic is still learning how to govern an Italian world that is politically connected yet culturally varied. A secret cult crossing local boundaries looks like a shadow version of Roman expansion itself. Rome has created networks of roads, alliances, colonies, and commands. Now it imagines another network moving beneath them, bound not by senate and law, but by oath and night. In the official mind, the Bacchanalia become a lesson. Religion may be tolerated, even welcomed, when it strengthens order or can be folded into public supervision. But a ritual that gathers bodies outside the visible hierarchy becomes intolerable. The god of wine and release becomes, for a moment, the god of everything Rome fears about its changing world: foreign influence, social mixing, female autonomy, youth disobedience, hidden leadership. An emotion that refuses to stand still before authority. Whether the actual rites were as monstrous as Roman sources claim is doubtful. What is certain is that Rome's reaction reveals a state terrified by the possibility that people might gather in darkness and belong to something it did not create. What the Senate believes it has found is not merely a cult, but a hidden republic of the night. In the official imagination, the Bacchic gatherings are not small circles of worshippers seeking release through wine, music, and initiation. They are cells of corruption spreading through Italy, pulling the vulnerable away from family discipline and replacing civic loyalty with secret obedience. The language of the crackdown makes the rites sound like a disease inside the body of the state. The infection begins quietly, among people who seem harmless enough to be ignored, and then it multiplies until respectable households, local communities, and even Roman authority itself appear at risk. This is how moral panic often speaks not in measured uncertainty, but in images of contamination, invasion, and hidden rot. The strongest surviving witness to the official response is the bronze inscription containing the senatorial decree against the Bacchanalia. Its value is enormous because it is not simply a later story told for dramatic effect. It is an administrative document, cold and precise in the way state fear can be cold and precise. It tells communities in Italy what may and may not be done. No Bacchic shrine is to exist without permission. No man is to serve as priest. No common fund is to be maintained. No one is to bind themselves by oath, vow, pledge, or mutual promise. No large group of men and women is to gather. Small exceptions are possible, but only under strict limits and with official approval. The god is not abolished, but the social machinery around the god is dismantled. That detail changes the entire meaning of the affair. If the Senate had believed only that people were drinking too much wine, it could have punished disorder. If it had believed only that sexual misconduct had occurred, it could have pursued individual offenders. But the decree attacks structure meetings, money, leadership, oaths, and numbers. Rome is frightened by the possibility that religion has formed an organization. The ritual is dangerous not only because of what participants may do during it, but because of what they may become afterward: a network, a sworn body, a community with memory and obligation. Livy's narrative, written much later, supplies the drama. He gives the panic faces, movement, and moral horror. In his account, The rites are exposed through a chain of personal danger, family conflict, and confession. The cult is described as having degenerated from a women's ceremony into mixed nocturnal meetings, then into frenzied gatherings where every crime becomes possible. The accusations are overwhelming. Initiates allegedly surrender their bodies. Silence is enforced. Witnesses disappear. Wills are forged, and those who resist are supposedly murdered. The picture is so complete in its darkness that it reveals its own problem. It tells us a great deal about what Roman elites feared. It tells us less securely what Bacchic worshippers actually did. The evidence remains incomplete, and scholars still debate the relationship between Livy's account and the events of 186 BCE. He may preserve older records, senatorial traditions, or genuine memories of the investigation, but he also writes with the moral style of a Roman historian who believes decline begins when discipline fails. His Rome is always measuring the present against an imagined older severity, foreign luxury, Greek influence, uncontrolled women, ambitious outsiders, and corrupted youth are familiar ingredients in Roman moral storytelling. When they appear all together in the Bacchanalian affair, caution is necessary. The historian must ask where evidence ends and cultural anxiety begins. This does not mean the panic is imaginary. The decree proves that something real has happened, and the scale of the response suggests that officials see more than a minor inconvenience. Bacchic associations may indeed have spread widely. They may have created bonds that crossed household and civic boundaries. They may have used initiation vows that made outsiders uneasy. Some groups may have handled money, protected members, or held meetings in ways that resembled private clubs. In a world without modern police, where elite control depends heavily on family authority, patronage, and public reputation, such associations can feel dangerous even when they are not revolutionary. Rome does not need to discover an actual army in the shadows to fear a rival pattern of loyalty. There is also the question of gender. Livy places women near the centre of the story, both as participants and as transmitters of the rites. To Roman moralists, women's religious activity often carries a double charge. On one hand, women are essential to household piety, mourning, fertility rites, and many forms of traditional worship. On the other, women gathered beyond male supervision easily become figures of suspicion in elite male writing. A ceremony where women initiate others, move at night, or share ritual authority with men threatens the ideal of the controlled household. What survives in the record suggests that this fear of female religious agency is one of the hidden engines of the scandal. Age matters too. The young are imagined as especially vulnerable. They can be seduced, corrupted, initiated before they understand the consequences. Roman society places enormous weight on the training of youth into discipline, obedience to fathers, service in war, respect for rank, mastery of appetite. A rite of ecstatic release appears to teach the opposite lesson. It teaches surrender, secrecy, and emotional abandon. Whether the actual rites did this in the way Livy claims is uncertain, but the accusation itself shows what Rome thinks civilization must suppress. To become Roman is to learn control. To fall into Bacchic frenzy is to unlearn it. Status adds another layer. The Bacchic panic seems to involve not only senators and noble families, but freed people, foreigners, and the socially marginal. These are exactly the groups whose movements are hardest for elite writers to interpret sympathetically. A slave's oath to a god can look, to a master, like disobedience. A freed person's private association can look like arrogance. A foreign priest's influence can look like invasion without an army. No single explanation fully accounts for this, but the pattern is clear enough. The more a ritual gathers people who are not supposed to hold independent power, the more threatening it appears. And yet, beneath the official terror, one can glimpse a different possibility. Perhaps many initiates come because Bacchus offers what Roman public ritual does not always offer them personally. The god's world is one of loosened boundaries, and loosened boundaries can be frightening to authorities but healing to those trapped by them. The enslaved person, the grieving woman, the anxious youth, the migrant, the poor labourer. The person whose life is measured by obedience may find in ecstatic worship a brief experience of being more than a place in a hierarchy. This cannot be proven for every group, and it should not be romanticised. But it explains why such rites spread. Fear alone rarely builds devotion. People come because something in the ritual answers a need. The Senate, however, does not investigate need. It investigates danger. Its solution is to make the invisible visible again. It breaks large gatherings into small permitted numbers. It removes unauthorized leaders. It forbids binding oaths. It denies the cult the ability to act as a corporate body. In doing so, Rome reveals the true center of its fear. The terrifying ritual is not terrifying because it belongs to Bacchus alone. It is terrifying because, for a few hours at night, people step into a world where Roman categories blur, and when they return, the state cannot be certain what bonds they carry back with them. What makes the Bacchic rites so disturbing to Roman authority is not only secrecy, and not only foreign influence, but the kind of human experience they seem to invite. Rome values discipline as a public virtue. It admires the citizen who can master appetite, endure hardship, obey command, keep his place in the family, and place the welfare of the state above private desire. The Roman ideal is never as perfectly lived as Roman writers like to pretend, but it remains powerful. A man is praised for self-control, a household is praised for order, an army is praised for formation, a ceremony is praised for precision. Against this world of boundaries stands ecstasy, and ecstasy is frightening because it does not politely ask where the boundaries are. The word itself carries the sense of standing outside oneself. In a ritual of ecstatic release, the ordinary self loosens. The careful public mask slips. Wine warms the blood. Music changes breathing. Repeated movement tires the body until thought becomes less sharp and sensation more commanding. Darkness hides faces while firelight transforms them. A group rhythm begins to replace individual restraint. People who would remain separate in daylight find themselves moving together, sweating together, trembling together, and perhaps believing that a god has entered the space between them. To participants, this can feel like contact with divine power. To suspicious authorities, it looks like the collapse of civilization in miniature. Roman public sacrifice is also emotional, and it would be wrong to imagine official religion as cold machinery. A procession through crowded streets, the sound of flutes, the sight of an animal led toward the altar, the smell of incense and blood, the gathered silence before the fatal blow, all of this can move people deeply. But public ritual channels emotion into a visible, recognized form. The crowd knows who leads. The priests know what words to say. The magistrates know what the ceremony means. The gods are approached through inherited order. Even fear is disciplined. Ecstatic religion, by contrast, seems to open a door through the body itself, and the body is exactly where Roman moralists locate so many dangers. Wine is central to this anxiety. Wine is not forbidden in Roman life. It belongs to meals, sacrifices, celebrations, medicine, trade, and social custom. Vineyards are part of the landscape of civilization. Yet wine also has a double nature. It can mark refinement, but it can also dissolve restraint. It can belong to the banquet of respectable men, but it can also belong to the tavern, the soldier's excess, the poor man's escape, the woman accused of impropriety. The foreign rite where measured drinking becomes sacred intoxication. Bacchus embodies this double power. He gives the vine, but the vine does not simply feed, it transforms. The same god who blesses fertility can also tear apart the sober self. Music deepens the danger. Roman military discipline depends on sound trumpets, commands, marching rhythms. Civic religion also uses sound, but controlled sound, placed within ceremony. The music associated with ecstatic rites is imagined differently. Drums, cymbals, pipes, and repeated cries that pull the body away from ordinary composure. Whether every detail in hostile accounts is accurate remains uncertain, but the fear is clear. Music can organize people without law. It can make a crowd breathe together before it thinks together. It can carry emotion faster than speech and create unity before anyone has stated a political aim. For a state that depends on command, music outside command is not a small matter. Then there is the unsettling issue of the mixed gathering. Roman society is built from separations male and female, citizen and non-citizen, free and enslaved, patron and client, elder and youth, magistrate and ordinary person. These boundaries are crossed in daily life, but they remain ideologically important. A ritual that appears to blur them becomes more than a religious event. It becomes a temporary experiment in another social order. A woman may hold ritual knowledge that a man lacks. A slave may be initiated before a master. A young person may share an oath with strangers beyond the reach of the father's authority. A freed person may stand near the centre of a sacred circle instead of at the edge of public respect. Scholars still debate how far such levelling actually went, but Roman fear does not require perfect equality. Even symbolic reversal can be alarming. Ecstasy also threatens because it creates a memory that cannot easily be undone. A person who has passed through an initiation is not simply someone who attended a meeting. The ritual marks time before and after. The initiate has crossed a threshold, heard words, seen gestures, perhaps endured terror, purification, or humiliation, and emerged with a new identity. This matters because Roman authority prefers identities it can recognize: citizen, wife, son, slave, soldier, priest. Magistrate, these categories can be named and governed. Initiate is harder. It may cut across the others. It may bind people who otherwise have no official reason to trust one another. It may create silence more powerful than obedience. No single explanation fully accounts for why Rome reacts so intensely to rites like these, but the conflict between ecstasy and discipline reveals a deep Roman unease about the human body. The body must be trained the soldier's body to stand in line, the matron's body to display modesty, the youth's body to resist luxury, the citizen's body to endure pain for the state. Ecstatic ritual appears to train the body differently. It teaches swaying, crying out, drinking, trembling, surrendering, perhaps falling into trance. Even if such acts are religious rather than rebellious, they look like rebellion against the Roman grammar of self-command. The fear is sharpened by the fact that ecstasy cannot be fully disproven from outside. A magistrate can count participants, seize funds, interrogate leaders, and ban meetings. But he cannot easily determine whether a god was felt. He cannot inspect the moment when a participant believes ordinary life has cracked open. The evidence remains incomplete because the deepest part of the ritual leaves few durable traces. Archaeology may find inscriptions, objects, shrines, or images, but it cannot recover the pulse in the throat, the dizziness after wine, the warmth of a hand in the dark, the strange relief of belonging to a god who welcomes what society restrains. The official record can punish the gathering, but it cannot fully translate the experience. This is why Rome's fear reaches beyond Bacchus. The issue is larger than one god of wine. It is the possibility that ritual can make people ungovernable for a few hours, and that those few hours can matter more than years of ordinary obedience. The Senate can command daylight. It can regulate temples, priesthoods, calendars, vows, and sacrifices. It can make religion public, useful, and precise. But ecstasy belongs to a more elusive territory. It rises where grief, desire, exhaustion, music, and hope meet. It gives people a taste of a world not arranged by rank. And for an empire that has made order into a sacred duty, even a temporary escape from order can feel like a threat to everything. Beyond the cities where Bacchic songs trouble Roman magistrates, beyond the harbours where foreign gods arrive with sailors and merchants, another kind of ritual fear takes shape at the edges of conquest. It belongs not to crowded streets or hidden rooms, but to forests, islands, rivers, and sacred groves where Rome's authority thins into mist. In Gaul and Britain, Roman writers encounter or claim to encounter religious specialists unlike the priests of the capital. They call them druids. And in Roman memory, they become more than local holy men. They become judges, teachers, political counsellors, keepers of ancestral memory, interpreters of the gods, and sometimes the dark guardians of rites too terrible for civilized eyes. The Druids are difficult to see clearly because almost everything written about them comes from outsiders. The communities that honoured them did not leave their own long-written explanations of Druidic teaching. Much of what survives passes through Greek and Roman authors, especially men shaped by conquest, curiosity, moral judgment, and the desire to explain unfamiliar peoples to Mediterranean readers. The evidence remains incomplete, and scholars still debate how much these accounts preserve genuine observation, how much they rely on rumour, and how much they turn enemy religion into a mirror for Roman fears. Yet even through this distortion, one fact remains striking. Roman authors do not describe the Druids as harmless village priests. They describe them as a power structure. That matters deeply. Rome can tolerate many local cults in conquered lands, so long as they do not interfere with taxation, recruitment, law, and loyalty. A village god may keep a spring, a local goddess may guard a hill, a festival may continue under Roman rule, sometimes with new names and new inscriptions. But the Druids are described as something larger than caretakers of shrines. They are said to arbitrate disputes, teach young nobles, preserve religious knowledge, and command respect across tribal boundaries. If this is even partly accurate, then Rome is not facing scattered superstition. It is facing an intellectual and sacred class capable of holding communities together. In Caesar's account of Gaul, written during and after his campaigns, the Druids occupy a privileged place. He presents them as men exempt from military service and taxation, devoted to sacred matters, education, and judgment. They are said to teach that souls do not perish, but pass after death from one body to another, a belief Caesar thinks encourages courage in battle. Whether he fully understands the teaching is uncertain, and his description is shaped by Roman categories. Still, the detail is revealing. A religious doctrine about the soul becomes, in Roman eyes, a military problem. If people believe death is not the end, they may be harder to frighten. A ritual idea becomes a battlefield force. The Druids also seem to threaten Rome because their authority is not tied to Roman institutions. They do not receive power from the Senate. They do not belong to the official priestly colleges of Rome. Their knowledge is said to be memorized rather than written down, passed through long training that may take many years. This gives them an aura of secrecy and depth. Rome is a culture of records, inscriptions, laws, decrees, lists, and visible offices. Druidic learning, as Roman writers imagine it, lives in a memory, voice, and initiation. It is carried inside human beings. It cannot be seized in an archive or easily translated into a decree. There is a lesser-known tension here between Roman admiration and Roman disgust. Some classical writers are clearly fascinated by the Druids. They compare them, sometimes loosely, to philosophers among other peoples. They notice discipline, teaching, astronomy, theology, and moral authority. At the same time, they associate them with blood sacrifice, savage customs, and resistance to civilization. This mixture is not accidental. Rome often admires the ancient and disciplined qualities of foreign peoples while condemning what does not fit Roman order. The Druid can be imagined as wise and barbaric at once, a philosopher in a forest, a judge beneath trees, a priest whose knowledge is impressive precisely because it is not Roman. The landscape intensifies the fear. Roman religion has sacred groves too, and Romans are not strangers to holy trees or ancient places. But when sacred groves belong to peoples being conquered, they take on a darker role in Roman imagination. Forests are spaces where armies lose formation, roads disappear, and visibility fails. A temple in a city can be entered, measured, taxed, rebuilt, or rededicated. A grove is harder to govern. Its holiness may come from age, silence, burial, water, roots, and memory. The gods there do not sit conveniently behind columns. They seem to breathe through the land itself. For Roman soldiers advancing into Gaul or Britain, such places may feel like more than scenery. They are psychological frontiers. A sacred grove can shelter rebels, but even when empty, it suggests that the people of the land obey powers older than Rome. The trees become witnesses, the river crossings become thresholds, the mist becomes an accomplice to rumour. The empire can build a road through a forest, but it cannot immediately make that forest Roman in the minds of those who have feared and honoured it for generations. This is why the suppression of Druids is not merely religious policing, it is part of conquest. To defeat a people militarily is one thing, to weaken the figures who preserve their lore, ritual memory, and sacred legitimacy is another. If the Druids teach young elites, settle disputes, maintain intertribal connections, and preside over rites that bind communities to ancestors and gods, then their removal strikes at cultural continuity. Rome does not only want obedience in the present, it wants the future to be reorganized around Roman power. No single explanation fully accounts for Roman hostility to the Druids. It includes genuine horror at practices the Romans considered unacceptable, especially allegations of human sacrifice. It includes fear of resistance among conquered peoples. It includes the Roman habit of defining itself against barbarian religion. It includes propaganda, because enemies become easier to conquer when their priests are described as cruel. And it includes a deeper unease before sacred knowledge that cannot be easily supervised. In the Bacchic panic, Rome fears a hidden community inside Italy. In the Druidic world, it fears a visible but alien authority beyond the frontier, rooted in memory, landscape, and the loyalty of peoples not yet fully absorbed. The empire can endure strange gods if those gods are made politically quiet. The Druids are not quiet in Roman imagination. They stand near chiefs, warriors, assemblies, and sacred groves. They teach that death may not end the self. They remember laws Rome did not write. They belong to a world where authority rises from ancestors, land, and spoken tradition rather than magistrates and marble. Whether every Roman accusation is fair remains doubtful, but the fear is real. And it grows as the legions move farther west and north, toward the island sanctuaries where ritual, resistance, and imperial violence will meet under darker trees. The island of Mona waits beyond the narrow water, half hidden by weather and distance. To Roman eyes, it is not just another piece of land off the western edge of Britain. It is a refuge, a sanctuary, a place where resistance gathers under the protection of priests and trees. The sea crossing is short enough to see the opposite shore, but the meaning of that crossing is larger than geography. On one side stand Roman soldiers carrying the discipline of empire shields, armour, commands, engineering, punishment, and the heavy confidence of men trained to make the world submit to roads and forts. On the other side stands a landscape that Roman writers remember as charged with dread, a place where sacred authority and defiance seem to rise from the same dark ground. The assault on Mona, known today as Anglesey, becomes one of the most vivid scenes in Rome's memory of Britain. The historian Tacitus describes Roman troops under the governor Suetonius Paulinus advancing toward the island in the 1st century CE. His account is dramatic, and the evidence remains incomplete because we do not possess a British or Druidic account to balance it. Yet the scene he preserves has endured because it captures exactly how Rome imagines the terrifying power of conquered religion. On the shore, according to the Roman version, stand enemy warriors, women in dark clothing moving like furies, and druids lifting their hands to the sky, calling down curses upon the invaders. For a moment, the disciplined soldiers hesitate. That hesitation matters. Roman soldiers are trained to face spears, arrows, chariots, fortifications, hunger, cold, and the panic of battle. But here the enemy is not only military, it is sacred. The curses of the druids are remembered as weapons of the invisible world. The women's presence intensifies the strangeness. The shoreline becomes a theatre of fear, where Rome confronts not just bodies, but meanings it does not fully understand. A soldier can raise his shield against a spear. He cannot raise it so easily against a curse spoken by a priest whose gods belong to the land beneath his feet. Tacitus tells the story as a Roman victory over barbaric terror. The troops recover their nerve, advance, and crush the defenders. The sacred groves are cut down. Altars, said to be stained with human blood, are destroyed. The island sanctuary is broken. The scene carries the rhythm of imperial justification first, the horror of native rites, then Roman courage, then cleansing violence. Scholars still debate how much of the description reflects direct knowledge and how much belongs to the literary style of conquest. Roman authors often make enemy sanctuaries appear dreadful before describing their destruction. The darker the grove, the brighter the empire's torch appears. Yet even if Tacitus shapes the story for Roman readers, the strategic importance of Mona is plausible. Anglesey may well have been a major centre of resistance and religious authority in Britain. Its position, separated by water yet close to the mainland, makes it an ideal refuge. A community can withdraw there, protect sacred sites, and maintain connections with groups across the region. For Rome, such a place is dangerous not because trees have magic in a childish sense, but because landscape can hold memory. A sanctuary gives defeated peoples a centre. It says that conquest has not reached everything. It gives warriors a reason to return and priests a place from which to speak. The sacred grove itself deserves careful attention. To a Roman observer, especially one writing for audiences far from Britain, a grove can easily become a symbol of barbarism. But groves are not inherently foreign to Mediterranean religion. Romans themselves recognize sacred woods, ancient trees, and places marked by divine presence. The difference lies in control and interpretation. A sacred grove under Roman order can be catalogued within the acceptable world of cult and tradition. A sacred grove belonging to resisting Britons becomes suspicious, because it is a holy place outside imperial supervision. Its silence is not peaceful, it is unreadable. What might such a grove have meant to the people who honoured it? The answer cannot be known with certainty. The evidence remains incomplete, and much has been filtered through hostile pens. But what survives in the broader record of Celtic and Iron Age religion suggests that natural places, groves, springs, rivers, bogs, hills could serve as powerful ritual centres. Offerings might be placed in water, weapons might be deposited after battle, human remains, animal bones, and crafted objects could carry meanings that are not always recoverable. Sacred space was not necessarily built upward in stone. It could be marked by the living world itself, by old trees, wet ground, boundary places, and the repeated memory of ceremony. This difference in sacred architecture matters. Rome often expresses power through permanence roads, walls, temples, arches, inscriptions, forts. It writes itself into stone. A grove writes itself into continuity. It changes season by season. But its sacredness may deepen with age rather than with construction. To destroy such a place, Rome must do something more intimate than capture a building. It must cut into the landscape. It must sever trunks, burn growth, tear open the place where memory has gathered. The act is practical, military, and symbolic at once. It says that the Empire is not content to defeat warriors. It will also break the places that make warriors remember who they are. The destruction of Mona's groves also reveals the deep link between ritual and resistance. A conquered people may lose battles and still preserve its world through ceremony. So long as priests teach, so long as sacred sites remain, so long as the dead and the gods are honoured in familiar ways, conquest is incomplete. Rome understands this instinctively. Its own identity depends on ritual continuity, ancestral memory, and sacred place. That may be why it recognises the danger so clearly in others. What gives Rome strength at home becomes intolerable when it strengthens enemies abroad. There is an irony in the Roman horror at foreign blood rites. Rome itself is no stranger to sacred violence. Its sacrifices are public, ordered, and justified. But they are still acts in which life is taken before gods and community. The Empire condemns the alleged savagery of others, while preserving its own forms of ritual killing as marks of civilization. This does not mean all practices are morally identical, nor does it prove Roman accusations false. It does show that the boundary between civilized sacrifice and barbaric cruelty is often drawn by the people holding the pen and the sword. Mona falls in Roman memory as a place conquered not only by arms, but by the breaking of fear. The soldiers who first hesitate before curses and dark-clad figures become, in the story, agents of rational order. But beneath that triumphal shape lies something more fragile. Rome is frightened because the grove has power before the battle even begins. It can make trained men pause. It can make the crossing feel like an entrance into another law. It can transform an island into a sacred enemy. And when the axes finally bite into the trees, the Empire is not merely clearing land. It is trying to silence a voice older than its command. The charge that clings most darkly to Rome's enemies is human sacrifice. It appears again and again in ancient descriptions of peoples beyond the comfortable centre of Mediterranean civilization: Gauls, Britons, Carthaginians, Germans, and others whose rituals are made to seem both ancient and monstrous. To Roman readers, the accusation carries enormous force. It does more than describe a religious act. It divides the world into those who offer proper sacrifice and those who have fallen into cruelty. It turns conquest into rescue. It makes the destruction of groves, temples, priesthoods, and local traditions appear not as imperial violence, but as moral necessity. And yet the matter is not simple. Human sacrifice did exist in parts of the ancient world, and the possibility cannot be dismissed merely because Roman writers used it for propaganda. Archaeology has produced human remains in ritual context across many cultures, though interpreting those remains is often difficult. A body in a bog, a skull in a sanctuary, a corpse placed in an unusual position, a person killed near a boundary, or deposited with objects such evidence may suggest ritual killing. Execution, warfare, punishment, or burial customs that no longer speak clearly. The evidence remains incomplete, and no single explanation fully accounts for every case. The dead rarely tell us whether they were offerings, criminals, captives, honoured victims, or something stranger to modern categories. Among Celtic and Iron Age communities, there are finds that make ritual violence plausible. Bodies preserved in northern European bogs sometimes show signs of carefully staged death. Weapons and valuables appear in watery places as offerings. Human bones have been found in certain sanctuary contexts. Some sites suggest that heads held special symbolic importance, perhaps connected to power, ancestry, victory, or the soul. But archaeology moves slowly and cautiously. It cannot simply confirm every Roman horror story. A body killed violently is not automatically a sacrifice to the gods. A severed head is not automatically proof of barbaric frenzy. Ritual, war, punishment, and display can overlap in ways that resist easy labels. Roman authors, however, prefer clarity. They often present enemy rites in a way that leaves little room for ambiguity. Caesar famously describes Gauls constructing enormous figures filled with living victims and set on fire, though scholars still debate whether this reflects real practice, second-hand rumour, literary exaggeration, or a mixture of all three. The image is unforgettable because it is meant to be unforgettable. It transforms the enemy into a people whose religion demands horror on a grand scale. Once such a picture enters the Roman imagination, the conquered landscape changes. The grove is no longer only sacred, it becomes a hidden slaughterhouse. The priest is no longer only a teacher, he becomes a butcher in ceremonial form. The political usefulness of such stories is obvious. An empire that expands by force must explain why its force is justified. It can speak of order, roads, peace, law, taxation, defense, and civilization. But nothing works quite as powerfully as atrocity. If the enemy kills captives for gods, then Rome's invasion becomes punishment. If the enemy stains altars with human blood, then burning the sanctuary becomes cleansing. If the enemy priesthood preserves cruel customs, then suppressing that priesthood becomes liberation. The accusation of human sacrifice turns cultural destruction into moral duty. This does not mean Roman officials are always cynical. Many may genuinely believe what they hear. Soldiers entering unfamiliar sanctuaries may see remains, stains, weapons, skulls, or ritual objects and interpret them through fear. Local informants may exaggerate enemy practices for advantage. Captives may describe customs in ways Romans misunderstand. Roman officers, already trained to see conquered peoples through a hierarchy of civilization and barbarism, may accept the worst version because it fits expectations. Propaganda does not always begin as a deliberate lie. Often it grows from fear, partial evidence, rumour, and the pleasure of moral certainty. Rome's own relationship with human sacrifice complicates the picture further. Romans usually present themselves as rejecting such acts, and in the public ideology of the state, regular animal sacrifice is the accepted form. Yet Roman history preserves troubling exceptions. In moments of extreme crisis, especially during the terror of the Second Punic War, the Romans are said to have buried living victims from foreign groups in the Forum Boarium as an extraordinary religious measure. Later Romans themselves seem uneasy about such acts, treating them as rare, archaic, and shameful. What survives in the record suggests that Rome wants to define human sacrifice as something alien, even while its own past contains moments that blur the boundary. There is also the violence of the arena, which Rome does not usually call sacrifice, but which still places death before crowds in ritualized settings. Gladiatorial games develop from funerary associations and become public spectacles tied to power, memory, punishment, and imperial generosity. Executions are staged as moral theatre. Captives and criminals die for the education and entertainment of the crowd. This is not the same as offering victims to a deity in the strict sense, and it should not be flattened into one category, but it reveals how carefully societies name their own violence. Rome can look at a foreign altar and see savagery, while looking at its own public killings and seeing justice, tradition, or civic order. For the peoples Rome condemns, sacrifice may have carried meanings that Roman writers either ignore or cannot understand. In many ancient cultures, the giving of life to divine powers is not imagined as random cruelty, but as a terrible exchange in a universe where fertility, victory, kingship, weather, and survival depend on maintaining relations with forces greater than human beings. This does not make such acts gentle. It does not make victims less dead. But it reminds us that ancient ritual violence often emerges from a logic of fear and obligation, not from simple bloodlust. The Romans know this logic in their own way. Every animal led to a Roman altar is part of a bargain with the unseen. The crucial difference lies in legitimacy. Rome's sacrifices are public, regulated, and authorized. enemy sacrifices are described as secretive, excessive, and uncontrolled. Rome kills under law, others kill under frenzy. Rome offers animals for the safety of the state. Others offer humans because they are trapped in darkness. These contrasts are too neat to be accepted without question. They reveal more about Roman self-definition than about the full reality of foreign religion. To call another people monstrous is often to polish one's own mirror. Still, the fear of human sacrifice is not merely an excuse added after conquest. It touches a real ancient terror, the possibility that the gods might demand the most valuable thing a community possesses. When crops fail, armies lose, plague spreads, or the sky produces frightening signs. Human beings have often wondered what price the divine world requires. Rome answers with procedure, animal sacrifice, vows, games, and expiations. Other societies may have answered differently at certain times. The evidence is uneven, and scholars still debate the scale, frequency, and meaning of such practices. What remains clear is that accusations of human sacrifice become one of Rome's most powerful tools for turning religious difference into imperial justification. By the time Roman axes fall on a sacred grove, the story has often already been written. The place is not simply enemy land, it is a site of pollution. The priests are not simply leaders of another tradition, they are guardians of horror. The people are not simply resisting conquest, they are trapped beneath cruel gods. That story makes empire easier to bear for those who benefit from it. Yet beneath the propaganda and beneath the possible truth of certain dark rites lies a more unsettling recognition. Rome fears the rituals of others because it understands, perhaps better than it admits, that every civilization builds its order around sacred violence of some kind. The terrifying question is not only what the enemy has done in the shadows, it is how much blood a society can place in the light and still call itself civilized. While Rome cuts down sacred groves at the edges of conquest and imagines barbarian altars darkened with blood, another kind of unsettling ritual life continues much closer to the center of imperial power. It does not need misty forests or island sanctuaries. It lives in ports, barracks, rented halls, courtyards, underground chambers, back rooms, and small temples squeezed into the noise of the city. The empire's greatest cities are full of official monuments, but beneath that public face are quieter religious worlds where people seek gods through initiation, purification, secrecy, and promises that reach beyond civic duty. These are the mystery cults, and for many Romans they are both fascinating and troubling, because they offer a form of belonging that the state does not entirely control. The word mystery does not mean that everything about these cults is unknowable. It means that certain things are hidden from outsiders. The initiate passes through a boundary, learns sacred words or gestures, witnesses symbolic acts, and receives an identity not available to the uninitiated. The evidence remains incomplete, partly because secrecy is built into the religions themselves, and partly because many ordinary worshippers leave little behind. What survives comes from inscriptions, reliefs, temple remains, hostile comments, philosophical references, and later, Christian polemic. These fragments do not let us reconstruct every ceremony with certainty, but they reveal a world in which private salvation, divine intimacy, and ritual transformation are becoming increasingly important across the empire. In the official civic cult, a person helps maintain the peace of the gods by participating in public rites. The city sacrifices, the household honors its spirits, the emperor is honored as part of the sacred order of power. But mystery religions speak more directly to the individual. They offer purification from pollution, protection after death, rebirth through divine encounter, or membership in a sacred community that stretches beyond local identity. This matters in an empire of movement. A soldier from the Danube, a merchant from Alexandria, a freedman in Rome, a sailor in Ostia, a widow in a provincial town, and a slave in a great household may all feel the fragility of ordinary belonging. A mystery cult can give them a second home, one entered not by bloodline but by rite. The cult of Isis is one of the most visible examples. Coming from Egypt but reshaped in the Greek and Roman world, Isis becomes a goddess of immense reach, mother, healer, mourner, protector of sailors, mistress of magic, guardian of fate, and giver of hope beyond death. Her worship can be public, colourful, and processional, with music, linen garments, sacred vessels, and elaborate ceremonies, yet it also carries initiatory dimensions that promise a deeper relationship with the goddess. Roman authorities sometimes distrust her cult, especially during the late Republic and early Empire, when Egyptian associations can carry political unease after Rome's conflicts with Cleopatra and Antony. Temples may be restricted or destroyed in certain moments, only for the goddess to return again, because devotion is not so easily removed by decree. Isis frightens some Romans not because she's simply foreign, but because she is loved with extraordinary intimacy. Her worshippers may experience her as a saviour in personal crisis. She answers dreams. She heals. She protects ships crossing dangerous seas. She gathers grief into a divine story of loss and restoration. The official gods of Rome can be powerful, but they often stand at the scale of city and state. Isis can feel close to the frightened individual. What survives in the record suggests that this closeness helps explain her appeal. An empire can demand loyalty, but it cannot always comfort the lonely. A goddess who promises to see the suffering person directly possesses a quiet power no magistrate can command. Mithras offers another model, one especially associated with soldiers, officials, and men in tight communities of service. Mithric temples, or Mithraea, are often small, enclosed spaces, sometimes built partly underground or designed to feel like caves. At the centre appears the striking image of Mithras killing the bull, surrounded by symbols whose full meaning scholars still debate. Initiates seem to pass through grades, share meals, and gather in spaces that create a strong sense of brotherhood. The cult leaves no sacred scripture explaining itself in plain terms, and no single explanation fully accounts for its imagery. Astral symbolism, Persian associations, Roman military culture, and initiatory hierarchy all appear to play some role, though the exact theology remains elusive. To Rome, Mithraism can be less publicly alarming than the Bacchanalia, because it often attracts men already embedded in imperial service. A soldier who worships Mithras may not be rejecting discipline. He may be deepening it through sacred fellowship, yet the structure remains revealing. Here too is a hidden community, bound by initiation, ritual meal, and graded identity. Here too are closed doors. Here too is knowledge reserved for insiders. The cult seems compatible with empire in many ways, but it shows that even the agents of Roman order desire mysteries beyond official religion. The men who guard roads and frontiers also gather into dim rooms beneath painted stars, seeking a god whose secrets are not announced in the forum. The cult of Cybele and Attis carries a different emotional temperature. Rome officially receives the Great Mother, yet her myth and worship retain an intensity that Roman observers often find disturbing. Her priests, ecstatic music, and associations with self-mutilation challenge Roman ideals of bodily control. During her spring festival, grief, mourning, renewal, and divine frenzy appear closely intertwined. The figure of Attis, beloved and lost, brings themes of death and return into ritual focus. Roman citizens may be restricted from certain priestly roles, suggesting again the familiar compromise the goddess may be honoured, but her most unsettling practices must be contained. These cults are not identical, and it would be misleading to treat them as one underground religion. Isis is not Mithras. Mithras is not Cybele. Cybele is not Bacchus. Each has its own symbols, myths, communities, and social patterns. Scholars still debate the term mystery cult itself, because it can flatten differences between traditions that ancient people experienced separately. Yet they share one feature that matters for this story. They create religious depth outside the ordinary public contract between Rome and the gods. They suggest that divine power may be encountered through inward passage, sacred secrecy, and chosen belonging. The city makes such religions possible. In a small ancestral community, identity is watched closely. In a metropolis, people can disappear into crowds and reappear as initiates. Rome, Alexandria, Antioch, Carthage, and other great centres gather strangers in such numbers that new forms of community become necessary. The empire's urban life is crowded, unequal, noisy, and often brutal. Apartment blocks burn or collapse. Disease moves quickly. Work is uncertain. Slavery is everywhere. Wealth stands beside hunger. In such a world, a ritual that says the soul matters, the goddess sees, the brotherhood remembers, or death is not empty can become irresistible. The authorities do not fear every mystery, but the old anxiety remains. A hidden ritual may comfort the powerless, but it may also bind them. It may strengthen soldiers, but it may also give them a loyalty deeper than command. It may promise salvation, but it may also teach that Rome is not the highest power in the universe. This is the quiet threat beneath the city, not open rebellion, but invisible allegiance, in the torchlit chamber, behind the temple curtain, under the painted cave ceiling. People are learning that the empire is only one layer of reality. Above it, below it, and within it are gods who do not need senatorial permission to enter the human heart. The Roman state can live with many gods, but it cannot easily live with loyalties it cannot rank. This is the line where ritual begins to look political, even when no one carries a weapon and no one speaks openly of rebellion. A small group meeting behind doors may seem harmless if it sings, prays, eats, and disperses, but to a government trained by wars, conspiracies, slave revolts, factional violence, and provincial uprisings, secrecy is never just secrecy. It is a space where another command may be born. A vow whispered in a dark room can appear, from the outside, like the first stone of a hidden fortress. Rome's suspicion is sharpened by its own understanding of oaths. The empire knows very well that words can bind bodies. Soldiers swear military oaths that transform them from ordinary men into instruments of command. Magistrates swear and receive vows. Clients are tied to patrons by obligations that may not always be written, but are socially powerful. Marriage, adoption, citizenship, treaty, and alliance all depend on formulas of loyalty. Rome does not dismiss ritual speech as empty. It believes words spoken in proper form can change a person's place in the world. So when an unauthorized group swears secret vows, the state recognizes the danger according to its own logic. The problem is not that the oath is irrational. The problem is that it may be effective. Associations are especially sensitive. Across the Roman world, people form groups for burial, trade, worship, neighborhood life, dining, and mutual support. Many are ordinary and even useful. A burial society can help poor members receive funeral rites. A trade group can organize craftsmen. A religious association can maintain a shrine or festival. But associations also gather people into bodies with offices, funds, meetings, rules, and shared identity. That makes them socially powerful. The evidence remains incomplete for how every local group functioned, because many leave only brief inscriptions or scattered references. But what survives suggests that Roman authorities sometimes watched them closely, restricted them, or dissolved them when they seemed politically dangerous. The fear is not abstract. Rome's history gives it reasons to distrust organized crowds. The late Republic is scarred by street violence, gangs attached to ambitious politicians, electoral intimidation, and public disorder disguised as civic action. In the provinces, local associations can become rallying points for unrest. Among enslaved populations, any form of unsupervised gathering can alarm owners, especially after memories of slave revolts have entered the Roman imagination. A religious group may insist it seeks only divine favour, but if it has leaders, money, initiation, passwords, and loyalty, then Roman officials may ask what else it could become under pressure. This is where ritual and politics begin to overlap. A cult does not need a political program to create political consequences. If it teaches members to trust one another across family, class, or local boundaries, it creates a network. If it meets regularly, it creates habits of assembly. If it collects funds, it creates resources. If it honors leaders, it creates internal authority. If it promises divine punishment for betrayal, it strengthens silence. If it gives members a story in which their true life belongs to a god rather than to public status, it changes how they imagine fear and obedience. No single explanation fully accounts for Roman anxiety, but these overlapping features make hidden ritual look less like private devotion and more like an alternate civic structure. The imperial cult adds another layer. As the empire develops, honouring the emperor becomes part of public loyalty, especially in the provinces. This does not always mean worshipping the living emperor as a simple god in the same way everywhere. Practices vary, and scholars still debate the nuances from region to region. But offerings, temples, festivals, images, and oaths connected to imperial power help bind diverse communities to Rome. To participate is to acknowledge the sacred order of empire. To refuse, neglect, or replace such rituals can look like more than personal preference. It can look like a crack in the architecture of obedience. This is why Rome often cares less about inner belief than visible participation. A person may privately love Isis, Mithras, a local river god, ancestral spirits, or the god of a distant homeland. The state does not need to police every private devotion. What it needs is public compatibility. Burn the incense, attend the festival. Do not form a sworn body outside permission. Do not insult the gods of the state. Do not reject the rituals that mark loyalty. The system is broad, but it expects gestures of inclusion. Trouble begins when a community's sacred identity prevents those gestures, or when its rituals make a deeper claim than Roman order can comfortably absorb. Political threat can also be imagined through rumour. A closed meeting invites invention. Outsiders do not know what happens inside, so they fill the darkness with fears already available to them: sexual disorder, cannibalism, treason, magic, poison, foreign corruption, slave conspiracy, and contempt for the gods. This pattern repeats across history because secrecy creates an empty space where hostile imagination can work. The Bacchanalian panic shows it. Accusations against foreign priests show it. Later suspicions toward other closed communities will show it again. What survives in the record suggests that Roman fear often says as much about the observer as about the observed. Yet secrecy is not always sinister. Many initiatory traditions conceal their rites because hiddenness gives sacred experience its force. A mystery revealed to everyone stops being a mystery. Silence protects awe. It also protects members from mockery or persecution. For the powerless, secrecy may be a shield before it is a weapon. A slave, a woman under household authority, a foreigner, or a poor labourer may need hidden space to practice devotion not approved by those who control daily life. Rome sees this hiddenness from above and calls it danger. The participant may experience it from below and call it refuge. The tragedy is that both perceptions can contain truth. A secret group can shelter the vulnerable, and it can also be misused by leaders. A ritual oath can create solidarity, and it can also enable coercion. A hidden meeting can preserve sacred identity, and it can also alarm a state responsible for public order. Ancient evidence rarely lets us separate these possibilities cleanly. The record is broken, biased, and often written after authorities have already acted. But the repeated pattern reveals the central tension: Rome's power is public, hierarchical, and visible. Many of the rituals it fears are intimate, horizontal, and unseen. By the time the empire reaches its greatest extent, it rules over a world of countless sacred commitments. It can demand taxes, soldiers, legal obedience, and public honours. It can build temples and destroy groves. It can regulate associations and punish forbidden meetings. But it cannot fully command the invisible loyalties people carry after ritual. A person who has knelt before a goddess, shared a meal in a hidden chamber, passed through initiation, or sworn silence before a god has entered a relationship Rome did not create. Most such people may never rebel. Most may continue their work, pay their dues, and live quietly inside imperial order. Still, the state senses the unsettling possibility beneath them all that somewhere inside the empire, communities are forming around powers older, stranger, and more intimate than Caesar. The most unsettling ritual threat Rome eventually faces is not the loudest one. It does not begin with drums in the night, sacred groves at the edge of conquest, or foreign priests in ecstatic procession. It begins with refusal. A small community gathers before dawn or in private homes, speaks prayers to a crucified figure, shares bread and wine, cares for its dead, supports its poor, and insists that its highest loyalty belongs to one god above every earthly power. To Roman officials, this can look strange, stubborn, and increasingly dangerous. The Christians do not terrify the empire because their ceremonies are wild. They terrify it because their worship draws a line the empire cannot easily cross. At first, the Christian movement is one more unfamiliar religious current moving through the crowded world Rome has created. It spreads along roads, sea routes, urban networks, households, workshops, and diaspora communities. Its earliest followers live within the Jewish world, and Roman authorities do not immediately understand the difference between Jewish tradition and the new movement forming around Jesus. The evidence remains incomplete for many local situations. Because early Christian communities are scattered and often small, while Roman attention is uneven, in some places they may be ignored for years. In others, suspicion rises quickly. Much depends on local tensions, rumour, governors, neighbours, and whether Christians are seen as merely odd or actively subversive. The problem is sacrifice. Roman public life is filled with ritual gestures that affirm belonging offerings to the gods, incense before divine images, participation in festivals, reverence for the emperor's sacred status, meals connected to temples, vows for the safety of the state. These acts do not always require deep personal belief in the modern sense. They require visible cooperation. A person may worship many gods privately, but in public he must not insult the sacred order that protects the community. Christianity disrupts this arrangement because its God is exclusive. The Christian may obey laws, pay taxes, serve neighbours, and pray for rulers, yet refuse to sacrifice to the gods or honour the emperor as a divine power. That refusal is small in gesture and enormous in meaning. Rome is used to adding gods, not subtracting them. A new deity can be tolerated if it joins the crowded sacred landscape without attacking the rest. But Christians do not simply bring another god to the table. They deny the gods of the table. To Roman ears, this sounds like atheism, not because Christians lack a deity, but because they reject the visible gods of civic life. In a world where divine favour protects cities, crops, armies, childbirth, and law, such rejection can appear reckless. If disasters strike, the presence of people who refuse the gods becomes easy to blame. Plague, fire, flood, military defeat, and famine can all sharpen suspicion. No single explanation fully accounts for persecution, but fear of divine anger is one of its most persistent roots. Rumour fills the gaps created by secrecy. Christians meet in private, call each other brothers and sisters, speak of eating body and drinking blood in symbolic language, and practice forms of intimacy across social boundaries that outsiders can misunderstand. Hostile imagination does the rest. Accusations of cannibalism, incest, hatred of humanity, and secret crimes circulate in some places. These charges resemble earlier fears surrounding hidden rites, and they reveal a familiar pattern. When outsiders cannot see a ritual clearly, they often populate it with the worst acts they can imagine. Scholars still debate how widely specific rumours spread at different times, but the basic dynamic is clear enough: secrecy, difference, and refusal make Christians easy to suspect. Yet Christian gatherings are not built around the kind of frenzy Rome fears in Bacchic rites. Their threat is calmer and more durable. They form disciplined communities that care for members, collect funds, bury the dead, support widows and orphans, teach moral rules, and create strong bonds across household and status lines. Enslaved people, women, artisans, merchants, soldiers, and members of wealthier households may all be drawn into the same sacred body. Though equality is never simple and ancient, hierarchy does not vanish overnight. What survives in the record suggests that Christian communities could reproduce social differences while also unsettling them through the claim that all stand before one God. That combination is powerful. It does not destroy Roman society immediately, but it gives people a second identity deeper than public rank. The refusal to sacrifice also changes the meaning of fear. Roman authority can threaten fines, prison, exile, torture, or death. Normally such punishments work because life within the social order is the highest visible good. Christianity teaches that faithfulness may matter more than survival. Martyrdom turns punishment into witness. This is profoundly unsettling to any state. A government can defeat rebels who fear death. It struggles with people who believe death may seal victory. Roman officials do not always seek mass executions. Many prefer compliance. The simplest solution is often to ask the accused to offer incense, curse Christ, or perform a public act proving loyalty. If they comply, the matter can end. If they refuse, the small ritual gesture becomes a confrontation between empire and eternity. This confrontation is not constant everywhere. Persecution is irregular for much of the early period, shaped by local pressures rather than a single continuous empire-wide campaign. Some governors are reluctant, some Christians live quietly, some are denounced by neighbours. Some seek martyrdom in ways that even church leaders later view with caution. The evidence remains uneven, and the popular image of relentless persecution from the beginning is too simple, but the underlying tension remains. Christianity does not fit easily into Rome's sacred flexibility, because it will not grant the basic courtesy Rome expects: acknowledge our gods, honour our rituals, and help maintain peace with the divine powers. The irony is that Christians are accused of endangering the empire while often imagining themselves as morally serious, disciplined, and peaceful. They reject many practices. Roman moralists also criticize sexual excess, greed, cruelty, abandonment of infants, and empty luxury. They build communities of care in cities where poverty and disease can be brutal. During epidemics, Christian service to the sick may strengthen their reputation among some observers. Though the details vary by time and place, their danger does not lie in obvious lawlessness. It lies in a loyalty that cannot be absorbed. They may be good neighbours, but they will not place Caesar, Jupiter, or the genius of the emperor above their god. By refusing sacrifice, Christians expose the fragile centre of Roman religious control. The empire does not need everyone to feel the same devotion. It needs everyone to perform the shared gestures that keep the sacred order visible. A Christian standing before an altar and refusing a pinch of incense breaks that visibility. The act is quiet, almost absurdly small compared with armies and monuments. Yet it says that the empire's highest symbols are not highest. Rome can tolerate many mysteries, but this one is different. It is not hidden because it is too ecstatic to control. It is hidden, then public, because it belongs to a kingdom no Roman official can enter by force. And once such refusal spreads, The empire faces a ritual terror deeper than frenzy, the terror of people who cannot be made to worship what Rome commands. Rome's response to Christianity never moves in a straight line. It is tempting to imagine the empire as a single mind, always watching, always hunting, always determined to crush the new faith from its first breath. The reality is less tidy and more revealing. For long stretches, Christians live in the open enough to be known, disliked, mocked, questioned, ignored, protected by patrons, or denounced by enemies depending on the city, the governor, and the mood of the moment. They meet in houses, bury their dead in marked places, write letters, argue over doctrine, collect money, and build communities that are visible to neighbours even when certain rites remain private. The evidence remains incomplete for many local regions, but what survives suggests a pattern of uneven pressure rather than one uninterrupted storm. That unevenness is part of what makes the story so unsettling. Rome is not always sure what Christianity is. Is it a superstition, a foreign cult, a Jewish dispute, a criminal association, a harmless eccentricity, a moral danger, or a direct insult to the gods? Different officials answer differently. Some seem content to punish only those formally accused and stubborn after interrogation. Others treat Christian refusal as a public danger that must be corrected. Ordinary people may blame Christians when disaster comes, because communities under stress often search for those who appear to stand outside shared protection. Fire, plague, famine, military defeat, or political uncertainty can turn religious difference into a target. The Christian who yesterday seemed merely strange can suddenly appear responsible for angering the gods. Imperial policy hardens most dramatically when the empire itself feels fragile. In the 3rd century, Rome is no longer the unstoppable power it once imagined itself to be. Frontiers strain. Armies make and unmake emperors. Plagues weaken populations. Coinage falters. Cities worry. Rival powers press from outside, while civil conflict eats at authority from within. In such a world, unity becomes sacred in a sharper way. The empire needs visible signs that all its people still belong to one order. Sacrifice is not just piety, it becomes a test of cohesion. When emperors require offerings for the safety of the state, refusal looks less like private conscience and more like desertion during crisis. Under Decius, in the mid-3rd century, inhabitants of the empire are required to perform sacrifice and obtain certificates proving compliance. The policy is not aimed only at Christians in its form, but Christians are among those most exposed by it, because their refusal cannot easily be hidden. A ritual gesture that many people can perform without deep inner conflict becomes, for Christians, a line they cannot cross. Some resist and suffer imprisonment, torture, or death. Some comply under pressure, some find ways to obtain certificates without sacrificing. Some flee. The crisis wounds Christian communities internally as well as externally, because after persecution passes, the question remains what should be done with those who failed. No single explanation fully accounts for the effects of persecution, because it does not simply divide Rome from Christians. It divides Christians from one another over fear, weakness, mercy, and purity. Later persecutions, especially under Diocletian and his colleagues at the beginning of the 4th century, try to strike Christianity more systematically. Churches are destroyed, scriptures are seized, clergy are arrested, sacrifice is demanded. The imperial goal is not merely to punish individuals, but to break the institutions that have grown too visible to ignore. By then, Christianity is no longer a scattering of fragile household groups. It has bishops, networks of communication, property, texts, charitable systems, burial spaces, and a memory of martyrs. It has become exactly the kind of organized sacred body Rome once feared in other forms disciplined, translocal, loyal to its own leaders, and bound by a story stronger than local identity. Yet persecution produces a result Rome does not fully control. Punishment can frighten, and it does. Many suffer, and many compromise. The history of martyrdom should not be romanticized into an easy tale of universal courage. Ancient people feared pain as much as anyone else. Families grieved, bodies broke, communities argued. But persecution also gives Christianity a powerful memory. The martyr becomes a witness whose death exposes the limits of imperial command. A prison cell becomes a sacred place. A grave becomes a shrine. The state tries to turn refusal into shame, but Christians turn endurance into victory. Rome can kill bodies, yet the story carried by survivors often grows stronger around the dead. Then comes the transformation no earlier Roman official could have expected. In the early 4th century, Constantine rises through civil war and attaches his rule to the Christian God. The details of his personal belief, political calculation, and religious experience remain debated, and scholars still argue over how quickly and how completely he understood himself as Christian. But the consequences are unmistakable. Christianity moves from persecuted and suspect to favoured and increasingly powerful. The Edict of Milan, associated with Constantine and Licinius, grants toleration and restores confiscated property. Bishops gain imperial attention. Church councils receive imperial support. Christian symbols enter the language of rule. The religion that once refused the empire's sacrifices now receives the empire's protection. This does not mean Rome instantly becomes Christian in heart, habit, or landscape. Pagan traditions remain deeply rooted. Temples still stand. Old festivals continue. Elite families preserve ancestral cults. Rural communities maintain local rites with stubborn continuity. Soldiers, officials, philosophers, farmers, and city dwellers do not all change at once because an emperor's favour shifts. The sacred world is too old and too layered for sudden replacement. What changes is the direction of power. Christianity no longer survives only beneath suspicion. It begins to shape law, patronage, public language, and imperial legitimacy. The irony is immense. For centuries, Rome fears rituals that create invisible communities outside public control. Now one such community becomes entwined with the state itself. Bishops, once vulnerable to arrest, become figures of authority. Christian debates over doctrine become matters of imperial concern because unity in belief begins to matter to political order. The old Roman instinct does not disappear. It changes clothing. The state still wants sacred unity. It still fears religious division. It still sees ritual as public power. But now the rituals it protects are Christian, and the rituals increasingly viewed with suspicion are those once woven through the empire's traditional life. Transformation brings new tensions. A faith formed around refusal must learn what it means to stand near power. A religion that honoured martyrs killed by the state must now speak with emperors. Sacred buildings rise openly. Christian charity expands. The calendar begins to change. The cross, once a sign of shameful execution, becomes a sign carried into imperial imagination. Yet the closeness of throne and altar creates its own dangers. The mystery that once unsettled Rome by standing outside command now risks becoming part of command. No victory in history is simple. By the end of the 4th century, under emperors such as Theodosius, Christianity receives official dominance, and many traditional public sacrifices are restricted or forbidden. The empire that once demanded offerings to the old gods now turns against those offerings in the name of a new sacred order. This is not just a change in religion, it is a reversal of ritual fear. The altar that once proved loyalty can become a sign of disobedience. The temple that once protected the city can be recast as error. The old gods do not vanish from memory, but their public world begins to narrow. Rome's terror of ritual therefore does not end with toleration. It mutates. The empire learns that it cannot permanently suppress every sacred community by force, especially one that turns suffering into meaning and refusal into identity. But it also carries forward the older Roman conviction that religion is never merely private. Ritual shapes loyalty, time, law, and public order. Christianity survives Rome's suspicion, then inherits Rome's problem. How to govern a world where the invisible commands the visible, and where what people do before their gods can reshape the fate of empires. By the time Rome has feared Bacchic dancers in the dark, druids in their groves, mystery initiates beneath the city, and Christians refusing sacrifice before imperial power, a pattern begins to emerge more clearly than any single accusation. The empire is not simply afraid of strange gods. It is not even simply afraid of blood, secrecy, or foreign customs. Rome is afraid of communities it cannot see forming beneath the surface of its own order. It fears the moment when ritual stops being a ceremony and becomes a bond, when a group of people begin to recognize one another through shared silence, shared danger, shared initiation, shared refusal, or shared memory stronger than the categories Rome has assigned them. This fear reveals something essential about Roman strength. Rome rules by making people legible. It counts citizens. It registers property. It names officials. It marks roads with milestones. It divides provinces, collects taxes, enrolls soldiers, records treaties, builds colonies, and inscribes laws into bronze and stone. Even its sacred life has this administrative clarity. Priests have titles, festivals have dates, sacrifices have procedures, omens have official interpreters. The Roman imagination is not comfortable with power that cannot be listed, ranked, or placed under a recognized authority. A hidden ritual is troubling because it produces an invisible map over the visible one. The Bacchanalian panic shows this fear inside Italy itself. The danger, as the Senate imagines it, is not merely that people drink wine or move in frenzy. It is that they gather across lines of gender, age, status, and household authority. They know things outsiders do not know. They are bound by oaths that magistrates did not authorize. They may obey ritual leaders whose power has no place in Roman law. The crackdown, with its restrictions on meetings, funds, priests, and promises, reveals the state's central worry. Rome wants to prevent a sacred association from becoming a second public body. It attacks not only behavior, but structure. The fear of the Druids reveals the same anxiety at the frontier. In Gaul and Britain, Rome confronts religious authorities rooted in land, memory, and oral teaching. The Druids are frightening not only because Roman writers accuse them of cruel rites, but because they appear to preserve a world before and beyond Rome. They judge disputes, they teach elites, they keep memory alive in forms that do not depend on Roman writing. They connect sacred place to political resistance. A Druidic grove is not just a place where rituals occur. It is a centre of continuity, a living archive made of trees, voices, and fear. To break it is to attack the possibility that conquered peoples can still imagine themselves outside the empire's story. The mystery cults reveal the fear in a quieter form. These initiatory communities are often not enemies of Rome. Many worshippers pay taxes, serve in armies, honour emperors, and live ordinary lives. Yet they still gather around experiences Rome does not fully supervise. They pass through rites that promise cleansing, rebirth, brotherhood, salvation, or divine intimacy. Their loyalty may not be anti-Roman, but it is deeper than civic convenience. A soldier of Mithras, an initiate of Isis, a devotee of the Great Mother, a worshipper of Bacchus may continue to live within the empire, yet carry an inner identity shaped by a god whose most important gifts are hidden from public view. The evidence remains incomplete, but what survives suggests that the empire's own vastness creates the loneliness and displacement that make such communities necessary. Christian refusal sharpens the pattern to its most dramatic point. Here the danger is not secret frenzy or foreign priesthood, but a visible limit placed on obedience. Christians may gather quietly, feed the poor, care for the sick, and pray for rulers. Yet they will not perform the ritual gestures that prove loyalty to the old sacred order. A pinch of incense becomes heavier than a sword because it tests where ultimate authority lies. Rome can accept many gods because many gods can be arranged into hierarchy. It struggles with a god who cannot be placed beneath Jupiter, beneath the emperor, or beneath the safety of the state. The Christian community becomes terrifying because its refusal makes the invisible kingdom more real to its members than visible punishment. No single explanation fully accounts for these episodes, and they should not be flattened into one simple story of tolerance against intolerance, or civilization against superstition, or empire against freedom. Rome can be brutally repressive, but it can also be flexible. It can destroy sacred sites, but it can also adopt foreign gods. It can punish secret associations, but it can also permit a vast diversity of local practices. Its fear rises most sharply when ritual seems to create a loyalty that cannot be folded back into Roman order. That is the thread connecting these different moments, not strangeness alone, but ungoverned belonging. This reveals something fragile at the center of every empire. Political power can command the body more easily than the imagination. It can move armies, collect tribute, build walls, enforce laws, and punish disobedience. But ritual works in a different register. It teaches people what to fear, what to hope for, what to remember, what to die for, and who counts as kin. It can make strangers into brothers, mourners into witnesses, defeated peoples into guardians of memory, and the powerless into members of a sacred order no official can fully erase. Rome senses this, perhaps because Rome itself is built on the same principle. Its own greatness depends on ritual memory, sacred place, ancestral obligation, and public ceremony. It fears in others what it knows gives power to itself. There is a quiet irony in the Roman campaign against terrifying rituals. The empire never escapes ritual, it only contests who may control it. When Rome suppresses Bacchic meetings, it does so through decrees that carry sacred authority of their own. When it destroys groves, it turns military violence into a ritual of purification. When it demands sacrifice to the emperor's order, it asks subjects to perform loyalty before witnesses. When Christian emperors later restrict old sacrifices, they repeat the ancient conviction that public ritual shapes the fate of the state. The gods change, the fear remains. What Rome reveals, then, is not a simple fear of darkness. It is a fear of rival forms of meaning, a hidden song, a grove, an initiation meal, a refused sacrifice. Each becomes dangerous because each says that human beings do not live by law alone. They live by symbols, bonds, dread, memory, and promises made before powers no empire can fully inspect. Rome can conquer cities and provinces, but it cannot prevent people from gathering around invisible centres, and whenever they do, the empire hears something beneath its own triumphal noise, another rhythm, another loyalty, another world beginning in the dark. The rituals Rome fears do not vanish when Rome changes. They survive by altering their clothing. The empire can ban a gathering, cut down a grove, restrict a priesthood, demand sacrifice, or destroy a temple. But ritual is older and more flexible than law. It slips into households, rural customs, saints' days, healing charms, seasonal festivals, funeral habits, sacred meals, whispered prayers, and the stubborn memory of places. The old public forms may fall silent, yet the human needs beneath them remain protection from disaster, contact with the dead, purification after danger, blessing for birth and harvest, courage before war, comfort before death, and some sign that the invisible world has not abandoned the living. This is the final irony of Rome's terror. The empire treats certain rituals as threats because they seem to form communities beyond state control. But Rome itself becomes one of the great carriers of ritual memory. Its roads spread not only armies and taxes, but calendars, cults, symbols, sacred images, feast days, burial customs, and religious arguments. Its cities gather gods from across the Mediterranean and beyond. Its soldiers carry divine names from frontier to frontier. Its merchants turn harbours into shrines of exchange. Even when emperors try to control the sacred world, the very scale of the empire makes complete control impossible. A rite suppressed in one place may be reimagined in another. A god renamed may continue under a different face. A forbidden practice may survive as folklore, habit, or local devotion whose origins are only half remembered. The Bacchic fear leaves behind more than a senatorial decree. It leaves a warning about ecstasy, secrecy, and the social power of chosen belonging. Bacchus himself does not disappear. Dionysian imagery continues in art, poetry, theatre, myth, and later, cultural memory. The god of wine and release remains difficult to domesticate because he speaks to something permanent in human life, the desire to step outside the narrow self, to loosen grief, to dance at the edge of order, to feel for a moment that the body is not only an instrument of labour, obedience, or rank. Rome can regulate meetings, but it cannot abolish the longing for release. The Druids, too, survive less as an institution than as a shadow in memory. Roman conquest and later transformations break the old structures that may once have supported Druidic authority, and the evidence remains incomplete for what exactly was lost. Yet sacred groves, holy wells, seasonal rites, and reverence for particular landscapes do not simply vanish from Britain, Gaul, or the wider Celtic world. Some practices are absorbed into later religious patterns. Some are condemned and forgotten. Some persist as local customs with meanings changed by centuries. Scholars still debate the continuity of many traditions, and romantic modern images of Druids often go far beyond what the evidence can support. Still, the larger truth remains, Rome can cut down a grove, but it cannot easily erase the human instinct to find holiness in trees, springs, stones, islands, and misted hills. The mystery cults leave a quieter legacy. Their temples may crumble, their initiations may become impossible to reconstruct, their sacred words may be lost, but they reveal a shift that outlives them, the growing hunger for personal salvation, intimate divine care, and transformation through chosen ritual identity. Isis, Mithras, Cybele, and other divine figures may lose their old public worlds. Yet the needs they answered continue. People still want a god who sees the individual, a community entered by devotion rather than birth, a rite that marks the soul as changed, a promise that death is not merely silence. No single explanation fully accounts for the religious transformations of late antiquity. But these cults show that long before old temples closed, the empire's people were already searching for forms of belonging deeper than civic ceremony. Christianity, once feared as a refusal, becomes the most powerful survivor of all. It inherits the empire's roads, languages, cities, administrative habits, and even some of its sacred instincts. It rejects the old sacrifices, yet preserves the idea that ritual binds communities across time. Baptism, Eucharist, martyr memory, relics, pilgrimage, fasting, feast days, sacred architecture, and liturgical calendars all reshape the Roman world rather than simply replacing it with emptiness. The empire's old question remains alive inside the new order. How should visible society answer to invisible power? The answer changes, but the seriousness of the question does not. What survives in the record suggests that Rome's terrifying rituals were never only terrifying because they were strange. They were terrifying because they exposed the limits of empire. A government can forbid a meeting, but not the ache that draws people to it. It can punish refusal, but not always the conviction behind it. It can destroy a sanctuary, but not the memory of why the place mattered. It can rename gods, reorganize calendars, and claim divine favor for itself. but people continue to seek contact with the sacred in ways shaped by fear, need, hope, and loss. Across centuries, the empire that once trembled at hidden rites becomes itself a ruin surrounded by ritual memory. Tourists walk through broken temples without smelling the blood of sacrifice. Archaeologists lift small votive objects from the soil without hearing the prayers once attached to them. In museums, bronze decrees, carved altars, curse tablets, funerary inscriptions, and fragments of statues sit under controlled light, quiet as stones. Yet each object hints at a human being standing before uncertainty. Someone asked for healing, someone feared betrayal, someone thanked a god for survival, someone joined a secret community because ordinary life was not enough. Rome tried to rule that invisible hunger, and sometimes it succeeded for a while. But the hunger outlived the empire. The fire of Rome burns lower now, not suddenly, but with the long patience of history. Its armies fade into chronicles, its temples become quarries, churches, ruins, and memories. The roads remain in places, running straight beneath modern fields, while the gods once honoured beside them have changed names, vanished from worship, or settled into myth. What once terrified senators and governors becomes, with time, a scattered archive of traces, a bronze tablet in a museum, a sanctuary foundation beneath grass, a carved bull-slaying god in a dim chamber, a spring still visited by people who no longer know the first prayer spoken there. The empire feared rituals because rituals could gather what power could not fully command. They gathered longing, terror, grief, loyalty, and the deep human wish to be seen by something larger than the state. In the dark, in groves, in houses before dawn, in underground rooms, people carried their fragile lives toward the sacred. Some rites may have been exploitative, some may have been violent, some were misunderstood, exaggerated, or turned into useful horror by those who conquered. The evidence remains incomplete, and that incompleteness is part of the silence around them. But beneath the uncertainty is a steady truth. Civilizations are not held together by stone alone. They are held together by shared gestures, repeated words, forbidden memories, and the belief that the visible world is not the only world. Rome rose by mastering order. It measured, named, built, punished, absorbed, and transformed. Yet even Rome could not master every song sung beyond the last lamp, every vow whispered before a hidden god, every grief carried to a sacred tree, every refusal made before an altar. The rituals that terrified the empire reveal not only the darkness Rome imagined in others, but the fragility Rome feared within itself. For if people could belong to something unseen, then no empire, however vast, could ever possess them completely. And so the story settles into a quieter image, a night road outside an ancient city, a few lamps fading behind walls, the smell of dust and cypress in the air. Somewhere beyond the fields, voices rise and fall, not loud enough to become history, but strong enough to be remembered by those who stand together in the dark. The empire listens, uneasy. The stars remain. The ritual passes into silence, and the silence lasts longer than Rome.